Democracy is four wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. The topic of discussion today is strengthening democracy. Does Sri Lanka need an election in the near future? Joining us this evening on the show are Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf, Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher of the Centre for Policy Alternatives, Attorney at Law Migara Dos, Civil and Public Law Expert, as well as joining us this evening on the show are Upul Jayasuriya, President's Counsel, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, as well as Srinath Pereira, President's Counsel. Thank you very much, gentlemen and the lady, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. To pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate left is Shania Darigama, on to my far left is our guest journalist this evening on Face the Nation, Shihar Anez. So let's get the ball rolling with Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf. Javed, what are your thoughts on democracy in Sri Lanka in the present context?
Well, in the present context, one of the problematic areas I see is that there is suppression of human rights in terms of people not being allowed to protest, which I think from a long-term point of view, apart from the rights of individuals, it is also counterproductive to a government, because if the government allows people to express themselves through protests, even if the protests are unreasonable, so that so long as they do it within the framework of the law, it's a kind of venting of people's grievances. So I think that area is we are on a negative footing on that. But overall, I think particularly after the 2015 elections, where the democratic space opened up, there is a positive aspect that we see, that people are not afraid to talk out. Sometimes some of the ideas or views we may not agree, but people are not afraid to talk out. And I think that is a critical factor in a democracy, because more people talk out and there is more exchange of ideas, clash of ideas, it enriches the democratic process. So I think that is what we need to look at.
So, Javed, you're also writing to a newspaper in Sri Lanka right now. Fear, self-imposed censorship has not come to your mind during the last 8 months to 1 year?
Well, not to me, because...
because you said earlier that there is freedom of expression, you can say whatever you want, but if you look at the past, what has happened in Sri Lanka, you've seen people being detained for voicing their opinions, voicing their concerns, and you're saying something extremely different now. So I'm trying to pick your brain on this.
No, it's like this. It's true that there have been social media activists who have been arrested, and there have been even lawyers, even other civil society activists wrongly arrested sometimes, but that has not deterred people from speaking out. That's my point. Because if you go back about 10-15 years ago, people were hesitant to talk, or if they would talk in whispers. So the good thing is that people are talking out. The bad thing is that sometimes they are harassed, and that this is where this PTA comes in. PTA is totally misused. As I mentioned in one of my writings earlier, the PTA is basically used as a arrest now, investigate later mechanism. And that is being proved regularly. Even the case of Vasantha Mudalige, who was held for so long under the PTA, then they suddenly found that there is no evidence, at least the magistrate determined. And that's another good point, because magistrates are writing judgments which discussing the pros and cons of all these issues. Then even today I heard the police had tried to get an order from the courts not to allow protests. But the courts have said, no, that is a constitutional right. If they break the law, there are normal laws which the police can act on.
Right. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf. We will talk to you momentarily after the first round on the topic that you just touched upon. We now move our attention to Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Your take on today's context in terms of democracy.
Well, we have this topic today in terms of 75 years of independence. So I think the big question is really what's the state of democracy after 75 years? And there, I think, a couple of things one needs to look at. Do we really have the freedom, the democratic processes, the democratic institutions that are fundamental in terms of a democracy? And I think also in terms of elections. So we are supposed to have local government elections on the 9th of March. Now, free and fair elections is fundamental for a functioning democracy. So I think there are key factors that we'll have to look to this year in terms of whether Sri Lanka actually has a functioning democracy. I think there are key components in terms of there are fundamental rights, there are institutions people can go to, but really in terms of what's happening or evolving in Sri Lanka, are there real freedoms? Are people able to freely express, critique, challenge, and not face any repercussions? And I think we need to also look at it in terms of the repression that we saw on the 3rd of February. So 4th of February, we saw this big parade by the government. Just a few hours before, we saw violence being used against those who were having a peaceful sit-in. So is there real freedom in Sri Lanka in this moment when we mark 75 years? The other thing I think is in terms of elections. Will we actually have elections? It's now established that right to vote is a fundamental right. Can people actually on the 9th of March go and exercise this fundamental right? These are things to be seen. So in terms of Sri Lanka and democracy, I think there are many issues we'll have to look at. But one positive thing is just looking at what happened with Daragalaya and the fact that the space opened up where people were able to challenge, critique, comment, and which saw an elected government, a very popular president who got a massive mandate, being kicked out of office. So I think there are elements of democracy that are there, but I would say it's a very fragile democracy in Sri Lanka at this moment.
Bhavani, very quickly, your statement today, usually very positive. You always paint a good picture about Sri Lanka and you say a lot of things with a lot of conviction. But today when you speak about the 9th of March elections, you sound very skeptic about it. Why? Are you trying to tell us that elections won't be held on the 9th of March?
No, I never said it won't be held. I'm saying is that there are questions in terms of whether it will happen, especially because in the last few weeks, even though the Election Commission has started the process of elections, holding elections, there are various things being thrown, from whether the government has the funds to have an election, to various instructions going to returning officers about that process. So lots of questions. There are also cases now in court. We'll have to see what happens through that process. But there are lots of, in just this year, in the last few weeks, we've seen various things being thrown into raising questions and raising doubts whether that election will be held. That said, one needs to recognize the Election Commission has started that process. So that, I'm being very clear, the process has commenced. What we'll have to see is what is in store in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher of the Center for Policy Alternatives. We now move our attention to Attorney at Law Migara Dos.
Right. Speaking of democracy, which is also the theme that we are under discussion on this day, democracy essentially means the people being represented for the power of the people being exercised by the representatives. Now, in 2020, we saw a government being elected with a 2/3 majority. And that government clearly had a mandate in 2020. But what happened thereafter? Thereafter, the people had to undergo immense economic hardships. They had to basically starve for months. They had to die in fuel queues. They had to queue up for their milk powder. They had to queue up for their gas. And even those gas exploded and people died out of that. So the misery that the people had to encounter was something that we had not seen in our lifetimes before. I think that was the reason the people began to question the mandate they gave to the people, they gave to their rulers, this government. So as a result of that, the people started agitating. The agitation reached such a level where in April 2022, the cabinet resigned. And as we all know, on the 9th of May, the Prime Minister and a cabinet resigned. On the 9th of July, a president resigned. And now we have a new president. But the all-important question that the people have is whether this president and this government have the mandate of the people anymore. Because that mandate, by the own conduct of the government, where they resigned in large numbers on several occasions, might well now not exist. And in that context, we are experiencing governance where massive taxes are imposed on the people, where national assets, where profit-making assets of the government like the Mobitel, SLT Mobitel, Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation are said to be privatized. So these are massive decisions that the government is taking right now that will impact us and our future generations also. So the question that the people have to ask is, do you all have the mandate to take these far-reaching policy changes to our country?
Right.
And I think it's ideal time for the government also to have a reality check about their own mandate right now.
Right. Megara, very quickly, you spoke about the mandate and you say that the present government does not have a mandate to stay on in power. However, we all know in 2019 they got a resounding victory at the elections. And now, being the devil's advocate, I'm posing this question to you. Why? Because in the eyes of the government in power, they may think or they may feel that they have been elected to do a job, to do a task. Let them do their job until the tenure is over.
The answer to that is, now if you look at the inaugural speech of the president he made in parliament today, his views are basically that he has a plan for this country. And he's very confident of that plan. He says only he has the solution. He portrays himself as the ultimate savior. Anyone who comes in his way are treated as traitors who would try to be chaotic for the society. And he says, no matter what, I'm going to do this. But that confidence, that level of policy being expressed by our president, I would say it's classic fascism.
So
that is classic fascism because that is exactly what they did also. Yeah. You have a view, you think that is the supreme, that is gospel truth, and try to impose it on the people. So I think they need a reality check.
He's not the savior. In your eyes, he's not the savior.
No, I'm saying the people have to choose their own savior and the people have to choose their own futures. And for that, any government would need to have a mandate. It's high time this government has that reality check.
Right. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Megara Dos. I now move my attention to Mr. Pul Jayasuriya, President's Counsel, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, also the former Chairman of the BOI. In your eyes, how important is democracy to attract foreign direct investors to the country?
Yeah, now, having heard what has been said by the gentleman and the lady, particularly Mr. Javed Yusuf, a very senior lawyer, about the democracy, I don't have to reiterate about what has been said on the democracy that is needed by all the people of this country. But in the meantime, why are we having democracy? To have freedom for the people. Why do we need that kind of freedom in this country? Because this should be a peaceful country for people to look at Sri Lanka. Why do we need the people to look at Sri Lanka? Because we are now going to the IMF. We are trying to get $2.9 billion, which is going to be spread over a period of 2 years. This is not going to be the panacea for us to get out of all the problems that we have on the economy. This is just a drop in the ocean, I would say. But what the main important thing that we need would be to get the international community, the investors, to come with the dollars that we require. For that to happen, we should have the democratic policies as far as referred to by this gentleman. But do we have that? At the moment, even if we have that, what is the investment climate in this country? We have a board of investment. But board of investment is today a toothless lion. So once a one-stop shop, I always refer to it now as a non-stop shop from the time that I was there. And people, when I was there for a month, we were terminating more than 20 agreements. But there were others from the Harvard Business School and the Oxford University, they were coming in advising us what investment we should be seeking. It's not for us to seek what the investment should be, but the investors should decide where they should invest. The problem is the hierarchy and the bureaucracy that is there, people are not coming here. There is a hurdle wherever you go. So we have to address that. Without addressing that, we can't get out of this problem. At the moment, the BOI cannot give any benefit to the new companies that are coming here. Even for a new company which was earlier tax-free, now they are subject to 36% taxes or 30% taxes. So will any investor come here when all the other regions in the neighboring countries like India, maybe Bangladesh or China, Vietnam, everywhere, they are offering tax-free investment for whatever the earnings that they make. Here we are saying, come. Invest in Sri Lanka, we are going to charge you 30% taxes. Who is going to come here? Then the facilitation. From the time, whatever, maybe the electricity, maybe the road works, maybe various approvals from the local government institutions. Wherever we go, they are stuck. They cannot get through. There are some companies that are here for the last maybe 2-3 years. They won't get the approvals. So that is why we have to change the BOI law to make it deeming provisions, where if you don't get the approval within a matter of, say, 2 weeks, it should be given to the board of directors to decide. If the board of directors of the BOI decide, and if that is not carried out by the respective agency, then it must be made an act of corruption. The Bribery and Corruption Commission should step in there and then charge these officers. Without taking the stick into your hand, we can never put this right. So if we create an investment climate for those investors to come and park their dollars in Sri Lanka, of course with the necessary tax holidays that are to be given, it's only then that they will look at Sri Lanka, whilst we have the democracy as we require.
Thank you very much, President's Council, Mr. Pulchai Surya, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, as well as the former Chairman of the BOI. We now move our attention to President's Council, Srinath Pereira.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And at the outset, let me say this, that whatever views that I express are my very personal views. Having said that, we are talking of democracy. In order to avoid any misunderstanding, I do stand for freedom of expression, freedom from arrest, freedom to exercise your franchise. I do stand for that. But there are certain basic things which we seem to overlook. In this country, I can tell you, more than half the population today, I think, are starving. Millions of children go to sleep today. I'm fairly sure, confident that I'm speaking, what I'm saying is true. Go to sleep without having a fair meal. So in that context, we are talking of very high-ranking topics like freedom of expression, freedom from arrest, freedom to exercise your franchise. I'm not saying that we have to protect that. There's no question. But there are more important issues that we have to draw attention to. Preventing starvation, ensuring that there is justice to all the people, fairness. I don't think the whole thing seems to be clouded by other issues. Before all that, I think we should draw attention to these basic issues, because millions of people who don't have a voice are suffering in silence. Having said that, can you also give me a little time to talk about the elections? I think we are focusing it in relation to the local government elections just now. I find that there are 4 tiers of rulers in this country, and there's a debate whether the local government elections will be held, the democratic right for us to exercise our franchise and all that. But as I see it, if I run short of time, maybe I'll continue with it a little later.
Yeah, you have a minute. Yes.
As I see it, the government and the opposition parties are talking of postponing or having the elections for reasons which are very selfish. The government is thinking of postponing the elections because they know that if they face the people, they are going to come out a cropper. The opposition is striving and asking for an election because they feel that this is the time that they will be able to show their strength, thereby as a stepping stone to take over power. That seems to be the motivation. As far as I'm concerned, legally, I don't think holding the elections will help us to change the regime. At a time when people are starving, at a time when there are hundreds and thousands of people who are starving, we are talking of having a local government election which is not going to change the regime. Therefore, I think this is not the time for us to think of local government elections. One more thing I'll say, if it is a question of having a parliamentary elections, yes, even at a cost, even foregoing some of the whatever little things that we have, having a parliamentary elections might be all right, for the reason that we'll be able to change the regime. Without that, I think we are talking, we are being very, very selfish, both the government and the opposition groups.
Okay, thank you very much, Srinath Pereira, President's Council. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. Onto my immediate left is Shania, and onto my far left is Shania, and onto my far left is Shihar. And you can pose your questions on the number 076-656-5353. The number once again, 076-656-5353. And we would love to take your questions as the show progresses tonight. Let's start off the Q&A with Shihar.
Yeah, thank you, Shamir. I want to start from what Bhavani said, the fragile democracy, right? It has been always a fragile democracy, right? Now, if you see the past elections, some of them, though people say that this is to make sure the democracy, but that has been used in the name of democracy for somebody to come to the power, right? This has been the case in several elections, right? Now, as Mr. Srinath Pereira correctly said, this is not this is not a normal circumstances. We are in a financial crisis. We are trying to move out of this unprecedented economic crisis. Now, in these circumstances, how do you see an election could help to move away from this crisis, plus to ensure the democracy in the country?
Okay, so there are a couple of issues here. One thing I want to be very clear is, in Sri Lanka's past few decades, during the war, during the JVP insurrection, we've had elections. A very powerful executive president, even in 1998, tried to postpone elections by declaring emergency. And there were cases filed in the Supreme Court. There's a very well-known case which says that you have to have the right to vote. The franchise is critical. It's part of the fundamental rights. And any attempt to curtail that would have serious implications in Sri Lanka's democracy. Now, I started by saying we are in a very fragile democracy because if you look at the institutions and structures and the actors involved, as you quite rightly said, people use these processes for their own benefit. Now, if you keep postponing franchise because there's a crisis, the danger is where do you stop? What is it that people are going to say is, okay, enough of all these excuses, now we go back to democracy. Because we are in such a fragile situation, we need to ensure these processes are not tampered with just to meet particular people's personal agendas or political agendas, whatever it is. So my thing is, yes, I recognize there is an unprecedented crisis. But we've also had elections previously during some very dangerous, dire situations. Now, we need to look at what can be done, but just postponing things is not going to solve that problem. And people also need to be able to come and select their elected representatives. Now, one will say this is only local government elections, but it also starts opening a floodgate when you start using excuses. Oh, it's local government, so that's okay to postpone. Because what's the precedent you start setting? Someone can say, it's provincial council. Well, we haven't had provincial council elections for a while, but that also can be just eternally postponed. So you start a very dangerous precedent when you start saying it's local government, so we can just postpone it. I would say we need to look at the best case scenarios and see how can you do it. The Election Commission has decided that process can continue. Now, if the courts say there's a reason it can't be held, we'll need to look into it.
So
but at the moment, those elections need to happen. Yes, economic conditions are very dire, but those economic conditions are not going to be just addressed because elections are postponed.
So if you look at the numbers, let's take a look at the 75th Independence Day celebrations that took place in Sri Lanka on 4th of February. The cost was approximately around 200 million. Are you in favor of holding the ceremony at a cost of 200 million, yes or no?
Not at all. Shamir, we put out a statement raising questions as to why are we having an independence parade when people are not able to get their basic needs.
If that is the case, why must we spend 10 billion Sri Lankan rupees at a time that we are in a very dire situation with regard to economically and hold elections?
Well, the difference is elections are a fundamental part of democracy. Having an independence parade so that one can showcase what? The military might, that the president is able to go out there and have these big tamashas. What is the fundamental right there? What is the implication for democracy there? So I think you can't equate an independence parade that may have been for someone's personal ego as opposed to a very fundamental part of democracy, which is elections. So
let me just
just on that point,
add to that question.
Yeah. Just on that point, no one is doubting, no one is questioning the economic crisis and the way it has impacted the most vulnerable communities. But the question here is, do you keep pushing back on something, and what is the implication of pushing back on a very fundamental part of democracy in Sri Lanka?
Bhavani, just to add to that, basically a concern raised regarding the local government election is that it could derail President Wickremesinghe's economic reforms and that, thereby delaying the IMF bailout. So how would you address that concern?
My question would be, what is this great plan that could be derailed? That's a very fundamental question, because the government commenced discussions with the IMF very late in the day, but those discussions are ongoing. Now, that is a very particular process, and now they're talking the Paris Club, and it's an international process, and very technical at one level. Why are fundamental rights being brought in to say that should be an excuse in a way? Or what is the connection? Now, with any international package, of course, fundamental rights are important. I mean, we've been saying checks and balances, separation of powers, rule of law, fundamental rights, they're very critical. But let those, we're not saying hold those negotiations, hold the government reforms. Everything should be happening at the same time. Now, this is what the president also has been saying. These things are all very important. And why can't the government do it at the same time? The cost factor is one element, but the Election Commission, an independent body, has decided the elections can be held. So let that process happen. That democracy should not be held hostage because people are using various excuses to delay elections.
Mr. Pereira, that's a very interesting point. Democracy should not be held hostage.
Yes.
And you bear a completely opposite opinion.
I do agree. That is Excellency, the President is making this an excuse to put off elections. for absolute selfish reasons. There's no doubt about that. I have no quarrels on that. But I have been a member of a local authority. I started my career as a member of a local authority, and I can tell you there's absolutely nothing that you do, having got elected and gone there, there's absolutely no contribution whatsoever that you make as a member of a local authority for the development of the country. That's my understanding. I have been there, right?
Probably you're not the best example to be a councillor.
Maybe I'm the worst example. That's a different matter. But I'm telling you my experience. The entire thing is managed by the chairman, the mayor or whoever, right? And even if you don't elect them, the local authorities will run. You don't need people's representatives to run a local authority. The administrators will run that. And if they do something wrong, I suppose it can be corrected legally by other means. What I'm trying to say is, we are talking of high democratic principles at a time when people are starving, right? When we have to address some more important issue, we are doing that.
No, but let's get back to what Bhavani said. No, Bhavani said elections have been held in Sri Lanka under even dire situations, like the example, the COVID-19.
No.
Situation a few years ago.
You'll permit me to say this. In 1988, we had the presidential election. Certain groups were agitating for holding these elections, saying we have to protect democracy, are the very people who told us that if you go to cast your vote to the polling station, we'll shoot you. What I'm trying to tell you is all these politicians are being, pardon me for using this term, bloody selfish. Right? For them, it's a question of not protecting the rights of the people or the development of the country. For them, there's only one thing and one thing only. That is, how do we make use of this situation, this fire, to roast our own goose, so that we can.
That's also an interesting point that Mr. Pereira is trying to make. Politicians are having petty agendas in mind. And even the opposition are going for an election right now because they know that they can wield some power, and then they can show their power at least the presidential or parliamentary level, and that is why they're requesting for a local government election. Now, this is not the need of the hour. And Mr. Pereira said that he's not the right example to use as a councillor. That's a different story altogether, but let's park that aside. But what are your thoughts on this?
And can I only add one thing? Now we have 8,000 members representing the local authorities, each one being paid approximately an average of 20,000 rupees. For what? For what?
Answering your question.
For what?
This entire week we've been seeing...
Can I also say this?
Mr. Pereira, give him an opportunity and then we come back.
Sorry.
No, you can continue.
Sorry.
Right. So this entire week we've been witnessing many protests by the people. The people are agitated by some of the economic reforms that are taking place in the country. For example, the excessive taxation on the masses is basically unbearable. For a person to survive with a salary of 100,000 rupees is not the same which he had enjoyed a few years back. The actual value of 100,000
a few months back.
Last year.
Yeah.
Now the actual value has come down to 45,000 rupees. So that is the concerns of the masses. So
and with the prices going up.
Exactly. With the Sri Lanka recorded the highest inflation rates, but their salaries did not increase. What had happened is their salaries are being taxed now. So those are the concerns of the people. So people have been agitating. Now my issue is, we have witnessed protests for the entire year, for the entire past year. But now the protest movement, people's agitations also have their limitations. Now the time is ripe for the people to make a political expression of their grievance. How do we do that? The only way to do that is to politically express themselves. And the best way to do that is by voting.
At which cost? At which cost?
The cost of not having a government with a mandate calling the shots for our future.
So what Mr. Pereira said was, Nigar, I'll just enlighten your memory a little bit so you can gather your thoughts when I pose this question to you.
Yes.
So what Mr. Pereira said was, this election that is being held on the 9th of March, if it's held, is only for the opposition to show their might. And why must Sri Lankans allow that? That was his point.
I think any government needs some sort of checks and balances from the people. So this government needs a reality check about their own agendas and their own policies. For example, their policy on taxation, their policy on privatization, their policy on price hikes. They need to know where the people stand. Otherwise, just like our president made his speech today, he thinks he has the blessing of all the people in this country and that what he is doing is absolutely right and the need of the hour. But I think people also have a say in that whole process. They need to make their voices also heard so that the president and the government can also finally listen to the people and get that much needed reality check.
Right. So Javed, you said something very interesting right at the start. You said that there is no fear. But one of the questions that one of our viewers have posed was, freedom to speak and write is allowed to certain people, like the lucky ones, like Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf. But on the other hand, this freedom is not given to those whom government think are dangerous to themselves. That is, those rising from the Aragalaya. So you're the select few. There is a majority in Sri Lanka who does not feel secure as you are.
No, it's not a question of...
No, this is what you told Javed.
Yeah. No, it's not a question of my feeling secure. I'm trying to...
but that's what you said in the opening.
I said all that. And I stand by it. But what I'm saying is, there is, if you compare, say pre-2015 to now, at that time there was a chilling effect where people talked in whispers. After 2015, a lot of things changed. And the space for democratic expression and so on grew. Of course, as I said, in the last several months, there has been this targeting of people who are expressing their protests and so on, which I think is not a healthy thing. But coming back to this whole question of democracy, democracy, I mean, it's not something new or something rocket science. There are so many facets to it. And what I see is, in these difficult times, the country as a whole, the national conversation is very skewed because we are coming to various conclusions. With due respect to everybody, now my friend Srina, he said about elections. What the politician wants the election for is one matter. It may be the opposition may want to prove a point, the government may not want to face it and so on. But the fact of the matter is that constitutionally and in the legal architecture of the country, elections have to be held at regular intervals. Because if you don't have elections, local government elections, which are now actually 1 year overdue, but permissibly. So 1 year...
We are only talking about the local government elections, but let's talk about the provincial council elections, which have been prolonged for a long period of time.
So I'll come to that. Then, the mere fact that you don't have the money to have that election does not mean that you can not have it. Because the people have a right to elections, and you find various people who are against elections saying people have not asked for elections. People don't want elections. It's not about people wanting or not wanting, but there is a legal regime which says elections have to be held like this and so on and so forth. And why I come back to the overall question of the conversation being skewed is, now you remember the executive presidency, in my view, is a root cause of a lot of our troubles. Now even we were driven to bankruptcy after the 20th Amendment, which gave so much power in the hands
but
of...
But let's be very practical. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumartunga pledged to abolish the executive presidency. Mahinda Rajapaksa pledged to abolish the executive presidency. Maithripala Sirisena pledged to abolish the executive presidency. Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that he'll come into power and bring forth a new constitution. What happened? All these are lies.
No, the thing is...
Let's be practical, Javed. No, it's good to... What you're saying, it's good to be in that wishful thinking space and think, this is going to happen in Sri Lanka very, very soon, and it won't happen.
No, I don't say it will happen, but we have to make it happen. Now, in 2015, we almost got there, but we were stopped halfway. The original idea was the abolition of the executive presidency, but midway through, the political machinations, if you like to call it, ended up in saying we will reduce the power of the presidency so long as we don't go to...
between President Maithripala Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Yeah, so don't go, so long as you don't go for a referendum. Actually, I don't know why we say this. We must go for a referendum because that gives the endorsement of the people. So that is why I come back, even if you look at the current debate about the 13th Amendment, I personally feel that the 13th Amendment will not solve the problems of the Tamil people. But if the Tamil people want it, and it's constitutionally there, what is wrong in implementing it? Because we need to, make people be happy with some of their situations, that psychologically, though I don't believe the 13th Amendment will solve their problems, psychologically, the people in the north and the east, we feel, well, we are at least looking after our own affairs, right? But be that as it may, unless there are structural changes to democracy, the democratic startup, that's why we wanted the commissions, independent commissions, because all those put together will create the climate. And I agree 100% with what Srinath said and Migara said. People are suffering, but our democracy provides a framework so that people can exchange ideas, and there are a lot of ideas if you listen to...
So you're saying the elections should be held?
Yes, it should be held. It should be held.
So, yeah.
I chip in to what my friend Srinath said about what's the point in holding elections, because the local authorities are of no use because they're not serving any purpose for the people of this country. But his main argument was why waste 10 billion rupees, if I understood him right. Now, do you know that
just
the
now,
budgetary...
at present.
Yes, the budgetary allocation for the VIPs, how much it is? Billions. Do you know that half the police force are for the MSD to guard them, the VIPs again? Do you know the cost of them? Huge. Do you know the defense budget this year, year on year, from last year to this year, has gone up by 80%? Do you know that? Then do you know that the Election Commission has been allocated 10 billion rupees for the election? They have been allocated 10 billion rupees for the election. But the problem is, does the law permit us to postpone elections? No. The local government election law provides that it can be extended by a period of 1 year, and that's the most. You can't extend that beyond that in the life of the local authority. You have to hold the election. If somebody says no elections are needed at this moment of time, somebody is saying violate the law. Violate the law. That is not permissible, because exercise of the franchise, exercise of the vote at a local election is also considered to be franchise. No court, no government can say anything or decide anything to work against the franchise of the people. Then we are confronted with bigger problems. We know, we accept this. We have more than 1 million people have lost their jobs in the construction industry. The food prices have gone up year on year. It has gone up by 84%. Now they say 59%. That is on year. That is last January to this January. Because last January also prices have gone up. Not that the cost of living has come down. Then the medicines, there is no medicine in the hospitals. Children are suffering. Adults are suffering. Then school children have no books for when the year begins by March this year. Then the cost of living is unbearable. But not holding the election, is it going to solve those problems? Are people going to get jobs when we don't hold the elections? I'll tell you the other way.
Will holding the election
lose jobs.
Will holding the election solve those problems?
I'll tell you one thing. Even the few jobs that are held by the people, there are so many investors still in this country. They still have some semblance of hope that something will happen, even a miracle, and then we'll take off and then we'll move forward. But even those people, if we take a decision violating the right of franchise of the people, then we are heading towards, as Bhavani said, towards anarchy. Then they get scared. Once bitten, twice shy, they will run away.
Migara,
people will not come here.
Can I just say, you ask his question.
We have to, they say this, not holding the election is not going to solve any of our problems. And also there are budgetary allocations, there are bigger budgets. If you want to save money for the election, cut those budgets. But don't tamper with the pristine power of the people in the franchise.
Can I answer your question in my own way? The local government elections will solve the employment problem of 8,000 persons who will be elected.
If you
it
don't
seems,
mind, just
Samir, I just had a question for Miguel.
Just want to round this off, if you don't mind, please, Mr. Pereira. So there are 4 three gentlemen and 1 lady for elections, and there is 1 lone elephant onto my right.
I'm not an elephant anymore.
That's a better
I'm
description.
not an elephant.
That's a better description.
Apart from that,
You were a UN peer.
yes, I was, and I'm now.
Just want to clarify: are you supporting President Ranil Wickremesinghe?
I have been supporting him some time ago,
But not anymore.
up to 2018. But since 2018, I have been opposing him to the best of my ability, and I will continue to oppose him right through my life unless he changes his ways immediately.
Right.
No, Miguel, I just want to know, okay, so there's no question that the democratic health of Sri Lanka is declining, but on the list of priorities is seeking to basically rectify this trumping economic recovery. Do you think, looking at general discourse in society, we're harping on about elections, and is that trumping economic recovery and the importance of that?
I think we are facing a crisis that we have never experienced during our lifetimes. And the issue is the current president and the government, as I said before as well, there's a question about their mandate. And they have a particular economic program which the people are also not very familiar with. But they've been adopting certain far-reaching changes for our society, for the public sector, for the ordinary man. And there are also questions about the actual, the correctness or the accuracy of the policies that are being followed. For example, I'll take one example. The Global Financial Integrity in 2008 released a report and exposed the issue of misinvoicing taking place amongst exporters. And they say it amounts to, during a period of 10 years, 40 billion rupees. One cabinet minister in parliament, Mr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, mentioned that this figure exceeds 50 billion rupees. And the central bank governor recently, during a AGM of the Exporters Association, raised the issue of repatriation of dollars by exporters. So these are issues where a lot of money that needs to come to our country are being flown away illegally. So there are people who have earned so much of money. But the actual policy of the present regime is to tackle the people. So my problem is that if the president and the government believes that their path is the only way, are we to believe that? Or as people, as citizens of a country, do we not have the duty, the obligation to express our political opinions? I think we come down to that. Whether we are going with a lone warrior, or are we also expressing or contributing our right of expression, our opinions? I think it comes down to that.
So you're not in agreement with Javed when he says there is a democratic framework now in Sri Lanka where anyone can express any opinion and can go scot-free without a problem?
I think democracy is, as it was raised before, is held hostage. For example, people who speak against the government or criticize the government are caged under the PTA. That's what happened to Vasanta Mudrike, for Jinaratha, for Siridhamma Himi, and for several others. And also, you know, right now, people cannot go on a protest. They need to obtain a consent from the police, which they say is that people are obligated to obtain the consent of the police under Section 77 of the Police Ordinance. The Human Rights Commission said that is not so, that it is wrong. But the police still continue to do that. So I do not think that we are free. I think our rights, the expression of our rights, are continuously suppressed by the present government.
Javed, even on the 7th of January, the government was planning to implement laws to regulate social media. So I'm trying to figure out from where you gather your thoughts in terms of the democratic framework that we have in Sri Lanka right now.
Shamir, I want to correct you. I never said that people can express themselves.
That's what you said right in the
No, I said that, but I never said they go scot-free. No, I started by saying that there is a
No, but you said
targeting of human rights.
That's not,
no.
Very sad of you said.
Yeah.
There is a very good environment. We can write anything we want. We are not prosecuted.
No, as I said, from 2015 there has been more space. Now, particularly
comparatively, that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, earlier than compared to earlier.
2009, 2010 era.
And also you can see people are willing to speak out in this sense. Now, if you look at even the Human Rights Commission and even the Election Commission, they were appointed not through the Constitutional Council process. It was from the 20th Amendment, where the President makes a direct amendment. But those individuals who are manning those are prepared to exercise independence. So my point is, now it's not that everything is hunky-dory, certainly not. Now Vasanta Mudulige and so many, a long list of people. Now today this the head of the Jamaat Islami, Ustad Hajjul Akbar, he was arrested after the 2019 this thing. He was detained and kept in custody. Then he was released. Then again he was arrested. Now today AG says no, there is nothing, no evidence. So like that there are cases. But my whole point is, democracy is essential to create the momentum to solve all these problems that the people face. And one of the shortcomings we are having in our democratic system, and as I said, the executive presidency has to go. Right? We will have to keep on trying. Unfortunately, there is no debate. Now everybody is talking who will be the presidential candidate for this party or that party. That means that discussion is being taken out. But one of the another important drawback in our system is the lack of accountability. Democracy, we tend to talk of elections to elect our representatives and give based on their policies or whatever. Then after that, when they come and do some disastrous things, there is no accountability. Where is the accountability for switching over from organic fertilizer, from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer for overnight?
But don't
and
you
putting
think,
all
but
the
Shah,
farm...
don't you think the recent judgment that was made on the Easter Sunday bombings and holding the head of state at that time accountable and to pay 100 million Sri Lankan rupees as compensation to the victims, that is the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
That sets the right precedent. It gives the right signals, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think there is a case, I'm not sure of the details, where people have filed a case in the Supreme Court about this economic accountability of the past few years. That case is there, so we look forward to, because people must be held accountable. Otherwise, no, with regard to this one last point, with regard to the local elections,
I filed that case.
You filed that case. Good for you. The local government elections, apart from all this whether it's in the law and it must be held and so on, it also will provide an opportunity for the infusion of some new blood into the system, right? Because the last lot who were elected in 2018, even after nominations on this day, one person was found the chairman of a Pradesh Sabha in Kegol district, was caught for bribery or something. Another one in Hammadata district for something. So there are a lot of bad eggs which have to be removed. That also will help the process. Of course, that is not the main reason we should have it.
Bhavani, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Mr. Javid, just I want to ask you, like, we are talking democracy in terms of, having the elections, but do we really practice that democracy? Like, democracy is all about accountability, human rights, right? Freedom of expression, right to live. Do we have it? I mean, we are talking only about democracy during the elections, right? But after the elections, what about these topics?
No, that's why it's a continuous process. From what we used to those days in the past when we were much younger, democracy was about going and voting. But now thinking has evolved further that it's not a blank check. The people have to be continuously vigilant and continuously call them to account. So that part is lacking. So we have to have one of the things everybody is talking about, recall, the system of recall, right? So we should try to work that out. So there's a lot to be done, but it doesn't mean that everything is perfect at the moment.
Bhavani, interesting if you look at Sri Lanka in this present context, with regard to the protests that are being carried out, with regard to suppression that is taking place. We saw that happening the day before the independence as well, on the 3rd of February. What is the reaction of civil rights organizations like the CPA on this premise? What would you lobby for as far as the international community is concerned? Because now the international community is looking at Sri Lanka at present because of the suppressions that are taking place. We saw that happening even during the Aragale. Now again, the international community is looking at us. What are your thoughts on this? It's quite alarming, isn't it? We are in a very precarious situation right now.
We've been in a precarious situation for a while, and the repression now is not new. I mean, the repression has been there for a while. And I'll just take a step back in terms of why is this repression allowed to be there without any real changes? And I think that's a fundamental question that many of us have been raising. That goes to the structure of the state, the institutions, the individuals involved. When you have an extremely powerful executive president, who, by the way, last year declared 3 states of emergency. Now, those are in court. We are challenging the legality of one individual just declaring emergency to prevent protests, largely to prevent protests. So, you know, we can talk about whether we should have elections, whether the local government, local authorities are effective, but it goes back to a fundamental question that even Javid spoke about, is we get stuck in the moment. So now, because of the crisis, everything else can be put aside. That's not going to solve the problems of this country. These problems have been there for decades. So in terms of the repression that has been there for decades, if we are going to continue to have a very strong executive who can overnight declare emergency, who can issue detention orders against protesters or any critiques, I mean, let's also take a moment to recognize that the debate around the BTA has come to the South because of the 3 arrests last year. But for decades, minorities have been targeted using the PTA, and very limited conversation, at least in the South. And those who critique challenge were also targeted. So we have repressive laws, we have security laws that can be used by an individual with very limited checks. So the repression will continue if we don't bring in the necessary reforms. Repeal PTA. Why do we have a PSO that provides broad powers to one individual? All of these things. Strengthening Parliament. Parliament should be having a role to question, critique the executive. You can't have an executive that overnight prorogues Parliament and then the committees all need to be re-established again because he wants to make a throne speech. I mean, what kind of democracy is that when one individual holds so much power? And I go back to this whole point of holding institution processes hostage. Now, the international community can watch, monitor, commend. Sri Lanka is before the UN Human Rights Council. Recently, we had the UPR system where the government went and made various pledges. That's at the international level. But if there's no genuine steps taken in Sri Lanka, if the government and the political elite and the bureaucrats as well, to some extent, if there's no real change, if they ignore the demands of the people, we are going to be stuck in this moment. We can have various debates about democracy and nothing's going to change. So international community can put pressure, but end of the day, it's up to the Sri Lankans.
So, Mr. Jayasuri, a very good point, you know, because the international community can put pressure, but again, everything has to rely on the Sri Lankan people. The citizens have to take responsibility. When it comes to investment, how does this draw a parallel? Example, we know for a fact human rights is one pillar as far as the GSP plus concessions are concerned. Right now we have made commitments to the COP summits as well with regard to climate change. What are your thoughts on this?
When you say international community as referred to by Bhavani, it's not necessarily the people who, the international organizations who are upholding the human rights, but also our donor agencies. The countries who are the democratic countries, mostly the aid or loans are expected from democratic countries, except one or two. I don't want to name them. So they too will be watching them. If I may take your memory back to the 2001 situation where the government of Sri Lanka was, with the help of the international community, there was a aid group meeting that was organized. The two chairs were USA and Japan.
The Tokyo Donor Conference.
Tokyo Donor Conference. The two chairs, co-chairs were USA and Japan. I think Richard Armitage was the representative from USA. I can't remember who it was from Japan.
Mr. Kashi.
They pledged $4.5 billion. Right? So they too will be bothered. They too will be bothered. The IMF is also backed by USA in a big way.
Don't forget to pull, at that time, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was holding power.
Yes, he was holding power and he was supported by his team of people, the UNP. But today he's in power, but he is supported by the people from another party whose political ideologies are entirely different from that of the UNP. So that's the difference.
Mr. Ashwin, do you think in any way that President Wickremesinghe is protecting a certain group in the SLPP and that is why he cannot perform to the best of his ability?
Let me answer this question with another question. He was elected to power by those same very rogues. Sorry for the language that I'm using. The same people who are to be probed are the very people who elected him to power. So how can he morally go behind those people and then put them behind bars?
No, but
I don't see anything happening.
Miguel said something very interesting. He said that maybe President Ranil Wickremesinghe thinks that he's a savior. And
but that's a different aspect of it.
Yeah, he's
playing
that role.
With regard to the economic policy or the 13th Amendment or that maybe some of it. In fact, in the 13th Amendment, I'm in favor of what he's trying to say. But you must get win the hearts of the people. That's a different matter. But something has to be done.
Is he not making his voter base? Now he's expanding his voter base. Probably he thinks that come elections, presidential election in a few years from now, he probably will have a chance.
Be that as it may, presidential election has to be held within another 1 year and 10 months. But his current problem is to stride over the current situation. How is he going to survive in power? You asked me the question, why is he not going behind the other people against whom there are so much of allegation? All that we need is the difference that I see in him and then the other main opposition party, the SJB. Mr. Wickremesinghe, when he was in power, the 5-year period, he set up a special committee, commercial crimes unit, and then set up another committee, even Andhra Kumar Zara, they were all there. There were so many files that were examined and then investigated. They were all there. They are still there, probably. Why is no action being taken to continue what was done? It is not done. Then, with regard to, there are bigger crimes that are. Now take for instance Air Lanka. There was one, I can name the person, Kapila Chandrasena. It was alleged by Boeing that he has been paid a bribe of $2 million. Now we heard this story about nearly maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago. Have we heard anything about him? He's leading a luxurious life in Australia.
Probably the $2 million.
Probably that. Then there was another person, the politician, who was said to be having $160 million in the account. Has anything been done? The private commission was directed by the President Rajapaksa, supposedly. Has anything been done?
But as let's not forget, you were also handing glove with that government at one
Which
point.
one?
The Yapalne government.
I was.
Yeah.
I'm proud that whatever was done, it was good things. There are a lot of good things that were done during that period.
Follow-ups should have been done when this Yapalne government was in power, not after.
No, but don't say, I would agree with you to a certain extent. But still, at least the investigations were done. The people were taken into custody.
Yeah,
they were put before courts.
Yeah, President Ranil Wickremesinghe on the 4th of February on his address to the nation said, every one of us should take responsibility to what has gone wrong in the country.
With a different kind of a tone, I think he said that. I think all are to be blamed. I think he mainly meant the people of this country also.
Yeah.
The people of the country voted out the former regime and then elected the next man, because the former regime didn't catch the rogues. Because the former regime didn't catch the rogues, they brought the rogues into power. So the people have to be responsible as well.
No, and
I think
also he said that the people voted for the wrong reasons, either to get a tender or because you. So that is correct. I think again, if the people have to take
until you set up the systems right, where having people, the law is there. If you don't implement the law, if you don't do what you have to do, it's an act of corruption. They must be dealt with. So if you don't, it's not a question of taking A into custody and then prosecuting all that. Because maybe A will be put behind bars and then the trial will be held and concluded. That's not the issue. Here there is a large amount of corruption that has been taking place in the society. So we have to put the system right. Now there is this Greek bond case. The complaint was made by Sujiva Senasinghe in 2011. Now 12 years have passed. Have you heard anything that has happened? That was the sale of Greek bonds, purchasing Greek bonds at 5.5 million euros at that time, and immediately after, within 3 months, the value came down. It was there in the public domain. I mean, the central bank can't say that they didn't know about it.
The economy collapse went on back.
Then the recent economy collapse in Sri Lanka. The second hierarchy of the central bank wanted to buy back the $500 million ISB that had been issued, because the going rate of the $500 million ISB was $200 billion. So if they went and made an effort to buy it back, we would have saved another $300 million. That's a huge amount of money. What happened was, when Mr. Cabral came into power, he made an announcement, no, we are not going to default. We are going to settle all our ISBs and all our obligations will be met. No sooner he created the stage. And
someone would have got benefited out of that as well.
He created the stage because probably he knew who the people who were holding the ISB. It's not a rocket science for someone to find out, investigate if they want to, as to who were holding those ISBs at that time.
Just do a forensic audit.
So like share market. So that opportunity was also deprived with the statement that he made, which I think was calculated. So now I think the Auditor General is made to look at and then assess and then file audit and file a report in court as to the losses that we have incurred by the settlement of the ISB. Then secondly, the pegging of the dollar. Pegging of the dollar resulted in a situation where we had to pump in so much of money because we were going on with the same kind of trend of imports. For instance, year on year, last year December, we have imported we have spent more dollars for the imports of the luxury goods like the apple, oranges, grapes and so on, so forth, than the corresponding month, December in the previous year. So we went on with a spending spree, because the PP Jaya Sundara gave instructions to the central bank to peg the dollar. That's what during the time of Dr. W.D. Lakshman. And Cabral continued the same. So these are the things that really resulted in a situation where we went on a nosedive. Even, I have always repeatedly said this, even split seconds before the crash land, with the pilot's skill or the divine power, if we managed to take it off, it would have been a different story today. But now it crashed. Now we are in debris. We have to, all the king's men and all horses cannot put the Humpty Dumpty again together. That's all. That's where we are. The situation is, we are having to face all these things. But we are going on there. All the other expenses in the budget, the same or even more than what we spent last year. But where is the money coming from? The people have to pay for it. Once, in one stroke of pen, we gave away all the taxes we were charging from the people, which was 600 billion rupees. We gave away like a Santa Claus. That was in 2019 January. Sorry, 2020 January. And now we have gone beyond that, much beyond that. And at a time when the rupee value has come down so much, when the cost of living has gone up so much, we are taxing them 36%, plus the nation building and the other GST and all that, another 20%. As Migara said, we are left with 45% of the pay packet. 45% with the increased cost of living in everything, we have to pay higher. If you ask a
so there is a question for Mr. Pereira. from one of our viewers. If the elections are postponed, as you say, do you think that the starvation will cease and lack of essential medicines and all the sufferings of the people will stop like magic?
No, certainly not. That's not magic. But very definitely in response I'll say that that amount of money that you spend at present can be utilized to give at least the minimum possible support to the people who are in need. I think it's a wrong way to ask a question, in the sense you're asking me, if we don't have the elections, is it a panacea? Is it magic? No, certainly not. But certainly, if you don't, I'm not against elections. Elections have to be held, no doubt. But what I say is, this is not the time for us to spend so much of money. We have to get our priorities right. This is not the time for us to spend so much of money in relation to an election which is not going to have any consequences as far as we are concerned in changing this regime, if at all.
But Javed, Bhavani, Nigara, Mr. Jayasuri, all of the opinion that if democracy is to be stated right now, we have to hold election.
That's their view. I respect their view, but I have my own view.
Okay.
And I have always been very frank in expressing my views.
Right. So usually local elections are held, and this system that is currently currently in progress is the fact that those candidates who are in the ward are given preferences, not the party. But it seems to me that this is all about the parties. It's about the SJB, it's about the SLPP, it's about the SLFP, it's about the NPP. It's all about the political parties. Usually, when this system was brought into play, they said, we don't want to think about parties, we want to think about the candidates who can serve you better in your own ward. That was the thinking when this election system came into play as far as the local government elections are concerned. But it seems that the purpose has been completely lost.
I think you're right to a certain extent that the political parties are playing a more dominant role in the run-up to this election. I think one reason...
Where do we hear any independent individual contesting? It's all about the political parties that are in power.
I think one reason for that is because the people are desperate of political expression, and in the process, their point of expressing their political opinions have unfortunately centralized on political parties. But also I think this is a personal observation. Now, Sri Lankan political culture throughout history, since independence, we have been maintaining elites in politics. Since 1948, there were few dominant political families running the show in this country. And even after 1977, the political elite continued by way of businessmen, and subsequently with the open market going haywire, it turned out to be shady businessmen becoming the political elite. But what we saw during the Aragalia period was the people started questioning this political culture. People started questioning corruption, people started questioning the perks of VIPs, people started questioning them going in motorcades. So the existing political culture was questioned by the people.
But it's happening even now, Megara.
Yes, that is correct.
Have you been on the roads?
That is correct. That is correct. So
every minister has 2 backup vehicles.
Yes, yes. So I think the ministers and the government in power have not been heeding for the views of the people. So I think this gives an opportunity for the people also to set new standards of a political culture, because they've been speaking about it all this time, like never before. They've been challenging this existing political establishment.
But Megara, usually in Sri Lanka, I think Shihar and Shania may agree with me, we are very forgetful.
That is correct. Certainly.
Whatever happens, it's just like a can of soda, a bottle of soda. It pops and then it explodes, and then we forget.
That's
and as Sri Lankans, we are also to be blamed for what has happened in the country, as President Ranil Wickremesinghe has said.
I think one issue I can agree with the President is regarding the 13th Amendment. I think you're also very correct. We have been very forgetful as people, as citizens, and we've also been very insensitive as citizens. Since 1956, the brother community of this country, the Tamils, were deprived of their language rights. In 1970s, they were deprived of their educational rights through the education reforms. In 1983, their businesses were destroyed. Their lives were shattered into pieces. Still, we have been insensitive. Still, we didn't give them a political solution. 13th Amendment may be a half-baked political solution, but that is one step forward of us being citizens and being sensitive towards our brother community. So I think, yes, we are, as citizens, as a country, we have our own follies.
So then, Vigara, when you see, I want to pose this question to Bhavani as well. When you all see protests taking place in Sri Lanka right now against the full implementation of the 13th Amendment, what goes on your mind? Bhavani?
If it's the 13th Amendment one,
because we are talking about protests, we say that protests have to be held, it has to be a democracy, the democratic framework has to go through, it has to pass. But when it comes to protests of this nature, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think protests on anything should happen as long as it's peaceful. It doesn't disrupt essential services and all of that. Protests are important. It's a form of people airing their views, and a democracy is where everyone, like this room, where we can have different opinions and positions, we agree to disagree. I think protests are extremely important. The fact that I think one needs to look at why are these protests happening now. The President has said full implementation of the 13th Amendment, and let's be very frank, 13th Amendment has been in our books for a few decades now. People are looking at it as if it's just happened overnight. No, this is now there for several decades. It's been in the law books, and why can't we implement what's actually in our law? The fact that Buddhist monks came out today and protested is a very public message, and one needs to question as to also the timing. The President gave a throne speech, he alluded to this issue, and then just outside you have these protests. Now, I mean, for several decades while it's been there, even when it was to be introduced, there were protests, so this is not happening in a vacuum. There is polarization on this issue, and this is why it's also very important to have these debates. One of the positive things in terms of last year was there was a greater recognition, at least in the South, there needs to be a power shared, that minority rights need to be respected. Minorities have gone through several cycles of violence. There was some recognition, not enough, but some recognition. So let's open that space and have this conversation.
Probably these monks who were staging these protests probably would not have even read the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Probably they're doing this for the sake of protesting. Is it
because the popular demand of some of the people?
Yeah.
Because this amendment came into play after the Thimphu talks in '87, so it has been there for a long time in the Sri Lankan law books.
I'll give another example, something like the 13th Amendment. Few years back, maybe 2 years back or 3 years back, there was opposition for the MCC agreement. What was MCC agreement? MCC agreement was to create an economic corridor from Colombo to Trincomalee, and then to develop and then invite the foreigners to come and invest in Sri Lanka. Right? And in the meantime, they were going to upgrade the land registries because they are in shambles. If you want to get the title search done beyond 10 years, sometimes most of the books are not available. They have to be computerized. Then the transport hub to be created. Was that going to be separate in the country or giving the land to the foreigners? No, it was not. But then it was inculcated in the minds of the people, saying because you are selling the country.
Yeah, if you look at Mr. Jayasuriya, such models have worked very well in other countries through the MCC program.
Yes. Now what happened? Including the Bharatization, I'm ashamed to say that. The Bharatization hierarchy at that time, they went and prompted the president, said, sir, this is going to happen. No, sir, this is going to separate the country. No, that's the kind of thing that they were saying. I'm ashamed. So finally, the entire country was telling, my God, we are selling the country if you bring the MCC agreement. We lost $488 million. Then the same way, 13th Amendment, if the police powers are to be given to those people in the area, that is to be overseen and controlled by the centre. If they are overstepping, then that can be attended to by the centre. They can revoke it even at the right stage. If land is being alienated in violation of the other laws in the country, the central laws that are applicable all over, then that can be attended to.
Because you can, the rule of law is whatever international conventions are signed, the law of the land is more supreme than anything else.
The supreme
right?
law.
Yeah.
So I think there is consensus. I think even Mr. Pereira would be agree. I'm not sure about that. In agreement.
He's your friend.
Of course, we
I don't.
we came together. We are going back together.
But yeah, please
I don't sell my principles on friendship.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so we have a question for you.
But what I'm saying is, I
yeah.
think all the people here, I'm not sure what he's going to say, are of the same view and mind with regard to the 13th Amendment, what has to be given. Now, I'm not saying Bhavani is going beyond this just because it's the law. No, I'm not saying that. Look at it practically. What is it? What are we trying to give?
Right.
Are we trying to lose the autonomy of the country? No. We are going to have the same control.
Can I say
Yes.
On the 13th Amendment fact, as I said earlier, I don't personally believe that this will solve the problems of the Tamils. But if they are happy to have it, and since it's been in the constitution, we should implement it. Now the problem is, there are some sections of the Sinhala community which may have genuine concerns, but that must be discussed in a constructive manner. Now there is a gentleman called Neville Ladua. He writes, and he's a strong critic of the 13th Amendment, but his arguments are put out very well, and you can meet them. For instance, I think during the last constitutional process under the Yapalna government, for this fear of separation, they found a formula which even Mr. Sambandhan and all agreed, that the president will have powers to intervene, whoever is holding the executive presidency, in the event of any province likely to showing signs of seceding. That special power. So that's a safeguard. So you can work out things. But the point is, the very same forces which brought the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government to power have suddenly woken up and protesting today. They never spoke a word about the suffering of the people in queues and all these days. Suddenly they have woken up that the country is in danger. The country is not in danger, but that's why I say there has to be a dialogue, a discussion. There are, as there's a saying, no, there are more than one way to skin a cat. So human ingenuity can find a formula which is acceptable.
I think the ingenuity of the president, he can find a formula very easily. All that he has to say is that he's going to hold the general election tomorrow. They'll all fall in line. They'll all fall in line with that. Because he can always do that. After, I think, February or March, he can decide to hold the elections. That's a whip that he has in his hand. This is one instance that I'm in agreement with.
Sure, can I take a question from one of our viewers and then come back to if you don't mind, please? So this is posed to Mr. Pereira. This is solely a question posed by a viewer and not mine. According to the President's daydream, the country will be out of this mess in 2024. Does Mr. Pereira want to wait for elections till after 2024 in keeping with the President's wishful thinking?
No, certainly not. I don't think I ever expressed a view like that. My view is we should agitate for parliamentary elections. Even, as I said, even though the people are suffering, they are starving, if whatever elections that we have is going to be fruitful, is going to bring some results, then certainly we may have to sacrifice whatever we have to achieve that. The only method by which we might be able to change this regime for the better or the worse, I don't know whether it's for the better or the worse, but the only type of election that might help us to change the regime is a parliamentary election.
So, Mr. Pereira, do you believe that we have a viable opposition to act as an alternative or to be an alternative?
Out of the bad lot, my answer is yes, there's one. Then there's also another group who pointed the gun at us when we wanted to go and cast our votes at an election. They said the first 5 people who come to the polling station will be shot. Those people are now fighting for the democratic right and to ensure that we are given the right to exercise our franchise. So, you know, this hypocritism, they are being hypocrites. That's all that I can say.
This particular party is the JVP.
Yes, yes. Others are frightened.
Don't get scared.
I think
Myself, Mr. Srinath Pereira to be scared? No, no.
You mentioned the party, that is why.
No, I mean, I didn't. Generally, I try not to identify individuals and parties, but
that's history. It's very evident.
Right. But will you give me just 2 minutes to add something to what my good friend Javid said? He said that the executive president.
So what Ramanayaka said was true. Javid is your friend. Mr. Jaiswal is your friend. Yeah, you can continue.
Yeah, but we have different opinions at times, at least.
The executive presidency should go. I add something which is more important. I think this proportional representative system should be changed, because I said that is the root for all corruption in this country. I was having a chat with one of my friends the other day, a person who wants to contest the Colombo district elections, parliament elections. He said that to contest the elections this time, you need a minimum of 100 million rupees. Now, having been a professional, my wife is a professional, with all the effort that we have put in and what we have earned, I have been in government service, I have been in the private sector for 24 years. I don't think I have 100 million set apart for an election. If I am to contest, I'm just saying, not that I'm going to do it, you have to either resort to corrupt practices to have that sort of money, or else you must have the support of corrupt people. And with that money, with 100 million to be put aside for an election. So to put aside 100 million for an election, you should at least have 500 million worth of assets. Right. Having done that, once I go into parliament, I will be thinking of the next elections, for which I will need another 150 million. Obviously, we are breeding corruption. We are breeding corruption. This nobody seems to be raising.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when it comes to democracy, Bhavani, you talked about international pressure. We have seen some sort of ups and downs in international pressure, where when one regime is in power, they press more, and when the another regime is in power, still the issues are the same, but the pressure differs. Do you see the same thing now?
In terms of whether there's
international pressure, I mean international pressure to hold the election, right? If this has happened in the previous regime, there would have been statement after statement from embassies to rights organization. Everybody would have come up with all the statements, but we don't see that now.
Well, you see statements, but I think one of the things we have to see is the process has commenced. Officially, that process is going on. I mean, I think some of us are concerned there may be setbacks in that process, but till something actually happens, you can't just come out and say, we have concerns. That said, if you look at some of the statements made by the international community over the last few months, they've been critical. But you're right, I think there's a section of the international community who feels they can work with this government, they want to engage with this government. Now one can look at as to why is it that they want to engage with this government as opposed to being very critical to with the previous one. And I suspect geopolitics also playing here, those are bigger issues than what we are grappling with. So there are bigger things we need to keep in mind, but I come back to this point, international pressure is critical. But end of the day, we have to take that, move things forward. And in that, I think what happened last year is so important, that people said enough of this decay, this political, the corruption, this culture of entitlement, we need a new system. Unfortunately, that system change hasn't really materialized. So we can always say the international community needs to put more pressure, but really it comes back to us. And let me also make this point. This is not an idealistic thing, but all I'm saying is democracy is very messy. We are not going to get overnight answers. Just because the local authorities are not functioning the way it should be functioning doesn't mean we should stop having elections. We have to fix the system. So, I'm yet to hear from the people who are saying this is not the time for these elections to say, how do you address the system change the people have been demanding? The people have been demanding for good governance, abolishing the executive presidency, greater transparency, accountability. You can't just say, leave aside elections, let's address the economic crisis and think those things are going to be addressed. These all need to be sequenced and done together. We don't have the luxury of saying, we are in a dire crisis, so let's hold these things. We'll choose what elections are convenient, what is more important, because that's our personal view. No, sorry. That's not how democracy works. So my fear, and I disagree respectfully, is that we can't just say parliamentary elections, because parliamentary elections also need, the systems have to be in place to get the right people, as you said quite rightly. The present reform, the present electoral system is going to get the same corrupt politicians back in. So just having parliamentary elections is not going to solve the problem. Where are the big reforms? Campaign finance, after a long time, something came about. So let's see how that works. We as citizens have to put so much pressure to ensure that is fully implemented. That the campaign financing, there's greater monitoring, the greater scrutiny. So we can't take this position of saying we'll choose which elections. We are critical of the system. It needs to work. We need to look to the international. So these are all excuses.
Nowhere did I say that local elections should not be held. All what I said is one has to prioritize your whatever you want, and I said just now the priorities do not favor the holding of a local government election because it's not going to bring about a regime change. That's what I said.
Whose priorities are we talking about? I think that also is a very important question to ask.
What I say is it must be something that will be fruitful. If it is an election which is going to bring about a change in the regime, yes, then it's all right sacrificing all what you have. But what I say is, spending so much of money at a time when we are suffering, when people are starving, right, to hold an election which will bring absolutely no result. At a time like this, if we were flourished, if we are having sufficient means, certainly yes, no doubt.
What if the same election was going to be for the election of the members of parliament? Are you going to say the same thing?
No, parliamentary elections.
Even now.
No, what I said, even now, I think you have not followed me. What I said was very clearly, even though we are going through a period of difficulty, if it is a question of holding a parliamentary elections, yes, let's sacrifice even now. It's all right. If we could, for the reason that will, for the better or the worse, I don't know whether it's for the better or the worse, but at least it will give the people an opportunity of changing a regime. But local authority elections will never, under the law, if one has understood the law, changing the local authorities or the representatives there is not going to bring about a regime change.
So, Mikar, we have a question from one of our viewers. Whether we like it or not, we must accept the fact that the Sri Lankan community has a lot of tolerance for corruption. This has led to the current state of affairs in the country. So, what impact would the local elections have?
Well, I think yes. Local elections, as Mr. Srinath Pereira also said, faced it quite a few times, that the impact it can make is quite less. But I think I disagree with that. I think the local elections, regardless of it being for the Pradesh Sabha, it is an opportunity for the people to express themselves politically. So we have been experiencing a political culture which is tainted with corruption, with elitism, with patron status for the political elite, and we treat them as patrons.
So you're saying, Gara,
yes,
you can test and try the political will of the people by spending 10 billion Sri Lankan rupees at this time.
I think the government, it's not about it not being the biggest priority. I think the government has got their priorities wrong. I think, like Mr. Jayasuriya said quite a while ago, we have increased our defense budget by 80%. Am I correct, sir? By 80%. And also, we have also increased the budgetary allocations for the President and the Prime Minister. We still maintain high expenditure for former presidents. So all this is going on.
All
But
that is
for-
okay.
All that
But the
is
election
okay.
is
But
bad,
the
because
election
we have
is
no money.
bad.
No, cut that down. We are not against
We are
that.
not- you have to
I
cut
think
all that.
it has to be cut down. There's no doubt about that. We
The
are all in
2000
agreement.
Now, the 2012 provincial UNB provincial council, Srinath Perera probably will be able to do that.
2000? No, can I tell you this? I have been a provincial council member for 10 years. And I can tell you, at the time, now there's no provincial council. At the end, I was in receipt of a salary of 150,000 rupees. State money, right? There were 104 of us in the Western Provincial Council. And I can tell you, there's sweet nothing that we did whilst being in the provincial councils, right? And without the so-called representatives, the provincial councils are running as effectively or more effectively today. Make no mistake on that.
One follow-up question from what Bhavani said, maybe
Javed can respond, yeah.
Javed can respond about this geopolitics, right? Now Sri Lanka has become a battleground for rival powers, right? And they also have an impact on the regime, right? How does that geopolitics have an impact on the democracy?
Well, geopolitics will have impact not only on democracy, even the shape of and the trajectory of even economic policies. But the skill is of a government in office is how to manage that, so that we do not become a battleground for geopolitical competitiveness.
It's already
Otherwise,
become, right?
It's already become. Why? That is because of the weakening of the economy. Otherwise, we could hold our heads high and we decide, we set the agenda. But now you find, because we are dependent on other geopolitical actors, we allow them to a great extent to set the agenda. So that is why the economy has to be strong. Otherwise, if you don't have economic freedom or economic strength, your political maneuverability becomes less. I mean, that is very obvious. The current situation is a good example of that.
And it's weakening day by day, right? At the moment.
Yeah. And the other thing is, sometimes we also forget. Now, when we talk about investment and assistance and so on from different governments, now if the Chinese companies come and invest here, for all intents and purposes, they are companies, but they are part of the Chinese state. Unlike, say, India or the West or something, the private companies are private by themselves. So there are so many.
But Javed, that has been the case right throughout. No, with a Chinese company that comes and establishes operations in any country, it's more or less the state that is getting involved.
Yeah, always.
It has always been.
So our leverage to that extent is different with other countries.
Let's talk to the four gentlemen and the lady. What is the way forward that we have right now? We are talking about holding elections right now. We know it's going to be, we'll have to wait and see how things are going to unfold in the next couple of days. But what is the way forward, Javed, in your opinion?
Well, it's a difficult situation, and therefore we don't have ready answers. But if I go back slightly, and this is where I would agree with Srinath when he says that if you have a parliamentary elections, not because it will ensure regime change, but the composition of parliament will change in terms of individuals and capable people, which could be an asset for the next 2 years. And that is where we again miss the bus. As soon as President Gotabaya Rajapaksa stepped down, the call in the country was to have a multi-party interim government with a stated program of work where everybody would share the burden and put our heads together and then arrive at some interim milestones. But unfortunately, that did not work. Even in this moment of crisis, the political parties couldn't come together.
Javed, you said something very interesting, because I recollect last year when the Aragalaya took place and where President Ranil Wickremesinghe took oaths, there was a lot of discussion about forming an interim government. They will sit in for a certain amount of time and then they will dissolve parliament and go for an election and seek the mandate of the people. But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen.
But that position, Javed, it's very powerful, isn't it? And anyone who gets it doesn't want to leave it. Now look at the post of the head of state. Now Maithripala Sirisena became the president, went on to become the Polonnaru district highest preferential vote taker, and now he has told openly that he wants to contest the next presidential election. Must be a goal, right?
Well, our culture is somewhat different to other countries. Now, if you see New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, she said not that she's too old or anything, but she doesn't have the energy to do what it takes. So she prepared to walk away. And this is another point about our political culture. The politician is all important to our people. In other countries, politicians resign. Even the last British minister, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, he resigned and went away into oblivion because they have a lot of things to do. And that is again part of the culture of the people. You know, if any one of the gentlemen here tomorrow become a parliamentarian or a minister, there will be many people to carry their bags and so on. You know, this is survival mentality also that we are having.
I can say
we don't question. We don't question our leaders.
I can't speak on behalf of the others, but I can tell you that if I become a parliamentarian or a minister, I'll put things right. Anyway, Bhavani, yes, your thoughts. What's the way forward?
Well, let's just say we are stuck in the moment. We are talking about repression, we are talking about this president, we are talking about elections. And everyone's alluded to this whole thing about what brought about last year in terms of a system change. A system change needs to change in terms of the state, the structures, the individuals. So we have to keep going back to, and you know, we can't keep saying, oh, it's inefficient, it's ineffective, so we just do away with it. We have to talk about the reforms. Abolishing the executive presidency is critical, as you quite rightly said. It was a huge demand last year. We instead have a 21st Amendment that continues to keep the executive presidency.
Yes.
So, and it's upon the citizens to keep pushing this. It's upon media, civil society, professional groups to keep reminding these are critical, not because it's convenient for one political party or a politician, but it's essential for democracy that we don't have power centered in one individual or one institution. So we have to go back to reforms in terms of what is critical for Sri Lanka. Keep pushing those debates, because those debates kept getting swept away to meet particular needs as a distraction. So again, we talk about what is important for a citizen. It's respect, it's equality, it's ensuring services are provided, it's all of it. We can't choose what is good for the time and forget the others. Long-term goals, we can't just think of what's going to happen in March and forget it, or what's going to happen next year because there's a presidential election. So long-term goals, having those difficult conversations, but end of the day, I want to end with a positive note, is that what we saw last year opened up spaces, re-energized the citizen. Even many who are complacent realize change is possible. Change is difficult but possible. I think we all need to push that, keeping in mind the economic situation is going to get much worse. We are likely to see much more upheaval. Don't ask me what nature it is, I don't know, but it's likely to happen. In a situation such as that, we should also think about, yes, all those essential needs need to be met, but those essential needs will not go away if we don't have those long-term reforms, if we don't have a change in the political culture.
Thank you very much, Bhavani Fonseca. Mikar?
Yes, I think we've been talking for this past hour and a half about the importance of holding elections. And I think Mr. Srinath Pereira brought a very interesting and valid point about how expensive it is for a candidate to run for an election. And if we look at it from a neutral perspective, during the election period, a candidate with a lot of money can make a huge influence. He can canvass through media, print media, electronic media, and basically get advantage solely because of the amount of money in his bank account. I think Sri Lanka took one positive step, that was the Election Expenditure Act. So now a certain foundation is laid down for a level playing field when it comes to elections. Basically, a candidate or other, the Election Commission declares a maximum amount that can be spent at an election. And also, every candidate should forward within 21 days of the conclusion of the election their expenditure and the donations they receive. But I think there are still loopholes that we can go forward from this system. Sorry, I'm taking time on this issue. But the loopholes are, if you look at the Indian Election Commission, they have investigative powers during an election. They can investigate deviations of the laws and the regulations by candidates. They can also make determinations while an election is going on. For example, if a particular candidate misuses or rather violates the regulations regarding campaign finance, you can declare him, you can reject his nomination even before the election is held. So I think we need to give the way forward for the conduct of fair, and we talked about the fragility of the people. To address all that, we can have level playing field in holding elections. One would be to sharpen the teeth of the Election Commission. And also about the way forward, I think people are now getting ready to make a political expression of all their grievances and what happened to them right throughout these 2-3 years. I think one major issue is suppression of people's rights.
Yeah, so Bikar, let's say there is an election on the 9th of March. Which party will reign supreme?
That's up to the people. I don't think this is the appropriate forum for me to make a judgment or a call on that. I think the ball is passed to the people. I think we've rejected a particular culture of politics. We've rejected suppression of our rights. We've rejected autocracy on part of rulers. I think the standards are set. The people have to...
now choose wisely.
Yes, now choose wisely.
Well, I think as at the moment, the expenditure that is being incurred by the individual candidates, yes, there is some law that is in place. But in the meantime, the powers of the Election Commission, I do not think at the moment the government or the government hierarchy is giving the credence that it deserves, particularly in point of view of the fact that there was a cabinet decision that has been supposed to have been taken recently, and then which decision was conveyed by the Secretary of Ministry of Public Administration to the divisional secretaries not to accept the deposits for the election. Now this is a huge step, and that was not even directed at the Election Commission. That was directed to the returning officers of the divisional secretaries, was named as divisional secretaries. Now, few hours later, he withdrew that letter. But in the meantime, up to this moment, the decision of the cabinet that was taken to stop the divisional secretaries from accepting the deposits is in place. So there have been so many. It is not for us to decide whether it should be held or not, but in all probability it should be held. It ought to be held. But in the meantime, there is a likelihood, there is an imminent danger of the elections not being held. So then, I think there are several applications that are before court that their rights will be violated in the event such elections are postponed. So this is a matter of concern. There are judgments that have been delivered so far. Even the use of the vote at the local election is a use of franchise. I do not think that any court will hold that the exercise of franchise at the local election can be permitted, because it is now held. It is by law, the gazettes have been issued, all the steps have been taken, the process has now begun. But we can see the police department now is quoting the expenses even double more than what it deserves, or more than the actual expenses. That's what I saw in Sunday Times front page headlines the other day. So these are efforts that have been, pressure that has been applied through different departments of the government to discourage the holding of the election, which I don't think is the right thing to do at this moment of time. Because once the election commission has taken the decision, the election commission is constituted by the Constitutional Council, and it's a democratic process. They have taken the decision. Now, nominations have been accepted. You can't put, in other words, leg brakes and then try to topple the election process, which I see happening, which is not the welcome thing to happen, because right at the moment we are also, even take the UN the resolutions that are there, which are in the corner, which are simmering. So they too will be all watching this situation. So every institution, every international organization, the governments, foreign governments, as I said earlier, the donor agencies, they'll all be watching. Are we going to follow suit? Are we going to follow the process, due process that have been promulgated in the Constitution and the election law, the local government election law? If you don't, then they'll take a note of it.
Mr. Pereira? I think your question was, what is the way forwards? What I'm going to say might be wishful thinking.
Just like what the president is saying.
I don't know. But all what I can say is this.
Try and draw a parallel to that?
No, certainly not. I will not run parallel to this. You always have to correct me after the president. I don't know why. But can I say this? I have told you that I'm moved away from him. So, but can I say this? As I see, the way forwards would be, I say it might be wishful thinking, for honest, honorable, committed people, people who put the country and the people who are suffering as the top priority, not their self-motivated benefits, should get together, try to educate the people of the wrongs that have been done right through, and maybe long term, to see whether we can bring about a regime change, a group of people who would come into governance, who would be more concerned about the country and putting things right. And in the process, can I also say this, maybe overnight you can't do it, but if I appeal to the honorable people around this country, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who are honorable, who are committed, who love this country, to get together. Maybe you will not be able to do it within 24 hours, but let's take a start and start from there. Maybe we originally tried to get 2 or 3 people into parliament, honorable people, expand it, and maybe long term to think of a group who will be committed, who will do the best, not for themselves, but for the country and its people. That's my wish.
Thank you very much, President's Counsel Srinath Pereira. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Javed Yusuf, Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Attorney at Law Mikala Dos, Attorney at Law and President's Counsel Mr. Puljay Surya, as well as President's Counsel Mr. Srinath Pereira, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation.
Thank you very much
for having a very candid and open discussion with regard to what democracy looks like and what it should look like in the present context as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. Thank you very much, Chennai. Thank you very much, Shihar, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. I should see you a little bit more often, Shihar. So take some time off and join us on Wednesdays at 9:30 on Face the Nation. That's what you should do. I leave you tonight with a nursery rhyme that enlightened my mind as quickly as when Mr. Jayasuriya mentioned it. So I thought I'll leave you tonight with that quote or that nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Let's hope and pray Humpty is not Sri Lanka. Take care and good night.